Hello, and welcome to another Help for Homeowners webinar session. I am Clemente Mejia, and I supervise the foreclosure prevention program at the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. This week, we'll be discussing avoiding property tax scams. The pandemic continues to harm families in the County of Los Angeles in more ways than one. The unemployment rate in the county is double of the national average, and several sectors of the economy remain restricted due to the high rate of new and positive COVID cases. Elected officials have enacted laws to maintain residential and commercial tenants housed, and until recently, little relief has been provided to property owners and landlords who continue to bear the obligation of maintaining their property, insurance, and property taxes. Our panelists will provide an overview of the property tax system and discuss potential scams that arise during an economic downturn. Furthermore, we will review some new laws that may provide some much needed relief to property owners. Today, we have Michael McComas from the Treasurer and Tax Collector. Michael is a management fellow for the Secured Property Tax Division, Tax Collections Branch. His responsibilities include excess proceeds from the sale of tax defaulted real estate, Chapter 8 Agreement Sales Program, tax defaulted property inventory and auction planning, and prior to joining the County of Los Angeles, Michael retired from the Marine Corps after 19 years of service, where he served as an officer and naval aviator. Before I turn it over to our presenter, just a reminder to our participants to keep your mics muted and use the chat box to submit your questions. Michael, go ahead.
Thank you, Clemente. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. As Clemente introduced me, I'm a management fellow with in the tax collections branch. I have just past 2 years of service with the county, and I've been learning every day since I've been here. What my part is in this presentation, I'm going to give a property tax overview, and then Clemente will give you the essential value of the presentation, which will be the advanced part, which would be the scam prevention. So I will start off with a high-level overview. When I think of property tax, I think, and most people may think of a tax that is based on the value of the property. In other words, an ad valorem tax. I'll talk about in a minute that our property tax bills include much more than just that added value tax. Property tax is levied by the appropriate governing authority, such as the County of Los Angeles. Why do we have property tax? What's the purpose? Well, if you look at your property tax bill, there's three. A lot of people don't study them very well. I started to when I started working here. There's three elements of your property tax bill, and that helps point out the priorities and the purpose. The first part is the general tax levy, which in our case is 1% of the assessed value of the property. That's what I just described as the ad valorem tax. And generally, what could you say that those funds go to? Well, county services. I think we have 37 departments here. I'll state a few of them just so you understand where your taxes are going. The treasurer, tax collector, auditor, that's the business aspect of running the county, but there's child support services, arts and culture, animal care, fire department, sheriff's department, public defender, district attorney, beaches and harbors, parks and recreation, a couple of museums, Museum of Art, Natural History Museum, public health. Public health has been in the news. Public social services, public works, regional planning, and also coming up will play a big part, Register Recorder County Clerk, which runs one of the biggest election operations in the country. So that's where part of that general tax levy is going. What else is on your bill? I said there's 3 elements. Voted indebtedness. Please go back, Kevin. I'm still on the first slide. Voted indebtedness, i.e. voter approval, a voter approved. So if you have a bunch of things listed under voter indebtedness, it means you or your neighbors voted for that. So examples are city, water districts, community college, unified school districts. A lot of us have school districts. And the third element is direct assessments. Those are not based on the assessed value. And those could be many things: fire districts, flood control districts, clean beach tax, could be your emergency trauma services, mosquito abatement. So those are what property tax looks like as a practical matter. So how do we collect the property tax? Well, with those tax bills, the treasurer and tax collector mails about 2.4 million property tax bills annually, and the treasurer and tax collector then collects about $20 billion annually. And the county budget's about 32 billion. So the treasurer tax collector collects about 2/3 of that. And when do we do it? You may be familiar. We have a couple of installments, first and second installment, and sometimes you may get a supplemental for a new title, like a change in title, you purchase a property, or new construction. So who's this about? Well, the consumer. There's 10 million constituents in LA County, the biggest county in the country. And who operates this property tax system? So here we are on the bullets in front of you. The following departments work together to produce and account for your property tax bills and payments: Office of the Assessor, Auditor Controller, Treasurer and Tax Collector, as I mentioned. And additionally, it's not a department, but Assessment Appeals Board for disputes of your assessed value. Next slide, Kevin. Office of the Assessor. Okay, we talked about the assessed value ad valorem. Who does that? The assessor. Assessor is going to establish the value of a property, appraised value. Okay, it's going to place that assessed value on assessment roll. It's going to approve and apply exemptions. What are exemptions? Well, there's a bunch of exemptions, and examples of some exemptions that they would apply. There's a homeowner exemption for new homeowners, which I think is a reduction of $7,000. But there's institutional property tax exemptions. You may think of that as nonprofit organizations that provide services to your community. Could be churches, colleges, free libraries, free museums, public schools, veterans organizations, low-income housing, housing for handicapped. So those are some exemptions that folks can apply for and receive for their the assessment roll. The assessor, office assessor, presents that roll to the auditor controller for further processing. Next slide, please. Auditor controller. So the first bullet there, I talked about there's tax levy, there's voter indebtedness, and there's direct assessments. That's what makes up the extended assessment role. The auditor controller, so the assessment, the tax rate is applied to that general levy. So the auditor controller does that, and then it sends that extended assessment role to the treasurer and tax collector, or TTC. Next slide, please. Okay, treasurer and tax collector essentially is a big heart for the budget of the county. We have the tax collections branch, we have a banking branch, we have finance and investment branch, and we have a internal controls branch. But in today's context, we mail the tax bills and we collect the taxes. We do a lot of other things: investing, borrowing, safeguarding money, You may see there provides enforcement. You could consider a tax sale, selling or offering at auction properties that are tax defaulted would be an enforcement action. And that's, and in addition to that, we have the property administrator, which does estate administration for the county. So we have two types of taxes: secured taxes, which you would think of as real property, which is improvement, land and their improvements, structures, and unsecured taxes you can think of as office supplies, equipment, movable equipment, airplanes and boats, and things like that. Next slide. Assessment Appeals Board. We'll show, I have another slide coming up about the property tax system. So we talked about assessed value. We talked about the assessor determining the value. The auditor controller then applies the tax rate to that assessed value. It's, common, a regular occurrence. Property owners dispute the assessment. Assessment Appeals Board is there to, that's the process, and they listen to disputes. So they listen to the evidence at a hearing, Assessment Appeals Board, and they'll make a decision on the property's assessed value. And it can decrease, increase, or no change. And all of those instances happen regularly because there's a lot of conditions that would warrant a new assessment of the property. Next slide. Property tax system. Well, I talked about the roles of the departments, who's involved, and we'll just walk through this, starting at number one. So we know that the assessor is going to determine the value, assess the value of the property. So the registrar recorder has recorded documents, the ownership documents, deeds, and other documents that establish legal interest. And then different agencies, city agencies and other agencies would provide permits, building permits, and things that show construction and actual improvements. So the assessor is going to take that information and make their assessment. And we talked about the assessment role. And then it will provide that information to the auditor controller, who applies the tax rate. And you can see off to the left of your slide, Assessment Appeals Board. Basically, that's for property owners that want to get their property reviewed again to change the assessment. You could think of it as a dispute, but there's a lot of instances why the assessment would change. Auditor controller applies the tax rate, sends that over to the treasurer and tax collector. We do millions of bills. We do a lot of collecting and many different ways. Right now, we're not doing in-person collections, but we have e-checks, credit card, debit card, and mail, all kinds of ways to collect the taxes. And then the auditor controller allocates the revenue to over 900 local taxing agencies, including some of the examples I mentioned, the county departments, agencies, different cities, schools, and special districts. Next slide. Okay, this is a segue into, I think Clemente will start here in a moment, but I'm going to talk to the first part of the challenges due to an economic downturn, non-payment of property taxes. I mentioned the first and second installment. So penalties and late fees. So when we're first and second installment, annually, you get two bills. They are due, well, the final due date for the first installment would be December 10th. After that, it would be delinquent. And the second installment, the final due date would be April 10th, which would, after that, would be delinquent. So you can see there 10% penalty of each installment, plus the second one adds a fee. And then at the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th, the fiscal year goes from July 1st to June 30th. Then when we hit the end of the fiscal year after June 30th, for unpaid taxes, it would be considered defaulted taxes. And then there would be a small fee of a redemption fee of $15 plus a penalty of 1.5% per month until those base taxes are paid in full. So we touched on that earlier. So there's a little more detail for that, which some of you may be probably familiar with the 2 installments, and a lot of people are familiar with the supplementals. And then I think Clemente may want to come in at this point.
Thank you, Michael. One thing that I would like to point out is that the recession that we're currently experiencing is much different than the 2008 Great Recession. If some of you remember, the Great Recession was more of a financial event as opposed to a health event that we're dealing with now. So the crisis in 2008 was a collapse of the financial system that kind of rolled over into other things, but it primarily started with foreclosure crisis. Then it became into the credit crunch, where banks were limited on how much capital they had on hand to lend. And then it kind of just dragged down for about 4 years. But this is a little different because we're dealing with a situation where it's a virus, and the economic downturn that we're experiencing now is more so due to the response to that virus, right? So we could thank our county health officials on taking the necessary steps to slow down the spread of the disease. And although it's still pretty rampant, I think that we could give them credit for the work they have done. But again, it's very different from the first crisis, where this is due to a virus as opposed to a financial event. So when we're talking about challenges, we're mainly talking about situations where people are unemployed, or their hours have been reduced, or they may have to have taken a job that has less pay, and that affects their ability to meet their financial obligations. Since this presentation is centered around property taxes, we're just going to highlight those issues, but we understand that there's other issues that consumers are dealing with right now. And it could also be very well that they're dealing with the virus itself. So when we're talking about challenges, we're meaning, financial situation where if someone is not making the same amount of money or bringing in the same kind of income, then that affects their ability to pay taxes. And as Michael explained, your inability to pay the taxes could turn into a situation where you're going to probably have to end up paying more the longer you wait. Now, if you own a property, and the property that you own is also secured by a deed of trust, so a mortgage, but you don't have an impound account on that mortgage, if the bank becomes aware that you have not made your property tax payment, then they could advance that money on your behalf to cover that obligation, but the banks are going to go ahead and then come back and charge you for that money. In this situation, what they could do, what's called a forced place impound account or an escrow account. And what they'll do is they'll add in that money that was advanced on your behalf, and they'll spread it over 12 months and then come up with a new monthly payment. So now, if you're dealing with a situation where, again, your income has been affected because of this response to the pandemic, but now you're getting a mortgage statement where they added another $300 to cover this obligation, that makes it even more difficult for a homeowner to pay. So that's a challenge here that we see in the county with some property owners that don't have an impound account with their mortgage payment. Next slide, Kevin. So kind of segues into the next slide here about foreclosures. And you heard Michael talk about the counties or the Treasurer and Tax Authority to sell tax defaulted properties after 5 years. So again, this is a situation where now a homeowner does not have a loan on the property, or most likely doesn't have a loan, because again, the bank will want to take the necessary steps to protect their interests. And in most cases, they will. So they'll go ahead and advance that money on your behalf. But there are situations where we do have properties in the county that are free and clear of any kind of encumbrance or loans. And in this situation, at least these homeowners have a 5-year period to try to come up with either the money to reinstate or to bring their taxes current. But if they don't, then the county has the power to sell that property at an auction. And then there may be a situation where there is excess proceeds, which again is Michael's department. But if the property is sold for more than what you owe as far as taxes, then you have the right to claim that excess proceeds. But in this situation, I think we all are primarily focused on remaining in the house more so than trying to claim the proceeds from the tax sale. In the event that you do have a loan on your property, and this is kind of going back to the forced place escrow accounts. So if the lender submits that money on your behalf, and then they're trying to bill you for it. So again, they're going to do what's called an escrow analysis. They're going to try to spread the money that they advance on your behalf over 12 months. And most likely your payment is going to increase. So if you're in a difficult situation where you have a financial hardship and you receive a new statement showing that your payment went up by $300, that is your new payment. You're going to have to make that new payment. Now, if you send a partial payment, let's just say you send the payment without the extra $300, then that's still not considered a payment for that month. So the lender may accept the payment, but they're not going to apply to the account until they receive the other $300 to give you credit for that month. The problem with that is that the banks may initiate foreclosure generally when you miss about 3 payments or so. But the difference here that you could see is the county won't sell the tax defaulted property until 5 years of delinquency, whereas a bank can initiate that a lot sooner. So if you miss about 3 months, then they could start the process of a foreclosure, and that generally will be completed within the year. Next slide. So now we're talking about scams due to these challenges. The first one here is decline in value reassessment, and this is something that was prevalent during the 2008 recession. There are companies, and not necessarily tax professionals, because there are tax agents out there that do help some property owners, but these are more fly-by-night type operations where they establish an operation and sent out mail solicitations telling homeowners that they could reduce their property taxes due to the decline in value, which is true. And it's an informal process that you could file an application with the assessor's office. There is information that you would need to submit along with the application, and the assessor's office will review that information. And they could either accept the value that you believe your property is worth, or they could reject it. Now, the problem here is with these fly-by-night companies, what they were doing is they were charging homeowners an advance fee to file this application. In some cases, I've seen that fee was about $300. And a lot of times homeowners never received anything in return. Because of this issue back in 2008, there was laws that were put into place to protect property owners from this. And now they're limiting the amount of money a person could charge for this service. And again, it's a charge that would have to be placed after the application is filed. So, but it's an issue that's still out there. I'm pretty sure that there may be individuals that would want to do this type of scam again if we get into a situation where we start to see an issue with an increase in foreclosures. So foreclosures is an event that would probably bring down values, and because of that, you may see this surface again. Now, there is a formal process, and again, Michael talked about that a little earlier, with the Assessment Appeals Board, and you can file an application with the Assessment Appeals Board. Now, generally with this type of scam that we've seen, We've seen that the compensation is based on a contingency, and generally the individual that's doing the work will keep a very high percentage of the refund. So just keep in mind, the best thing that we could advise in this type of situation, if you're looking to do that, it's probably best to reach out to the county first, or speak to more than one, probably tax advisor, about the services and the fees. But in a situation where it was the assessment appeals process, I think I've seen a situation when they were trying to keep 40% of the refund for the services that they're providing. So just keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Another issue with economic downturn is people are in a situation where there's nothing else they could do, right? And what happens is that they may be approached by an individual, a non-attorney, generally it's a non-attorney, that tell them that they could help them keep their house. And in some cases, they really don't explain how, but generally what they'll do is they'll end up filing a bankruptcy under the property owner's name. Now, with the bankruptcy, what that does is it's going to halt any adverse action against the creditor. I'm sorry, the debtor, not the creditor, the debtor. And that includes everything, right? So it could include a foreclosure, any kind of lawsuit, collection type cases or issues. But again, the bankruptcy process is a lengthy process where either you're choosing to liquidate your estate, or you're looking to reorganize your debts. And that's a process that goes through the federal court, and you either come up with a plan to repay your debts, or you liquidate to try to get rid of most of your debts. So in that type of situation, if you're approached by an individual, just keep in mind it's best to deal with an attorney, and you could always verify that information. When it comes to bankruptcies, because it is federal law, the attorney may be licensed in different states. So if they're a California attorney, you could verify their information with the State Bar of California. And it's fairly easy to do that. So you could just go to their website and enter the attorney's name to verify their licensing. The next issue here is the transfer or sale of the property. And in this type of situation or scam, we see where a person or a company will come to a homeowner and promise to assume all obligations while you lease the property with an option to buy it back. In these situations, what they mean by assume all obligations, that would include mortgage payments, tax payments, insurance, and on the condition that you remain in the property and you paid them a monthly rent. What we've seen in these type of cases or transaction is that the person that's offering the service doesn't hold to their end of the bargain. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll either take title and collect your rental payments, but on the other end, they don't make the mortgage payments as they promised. Or once they obtain title, what they try to do is take out a loan against whatever equity you may have in your property and then just run away with that. So be careful when you're dealing with a situation like this. Generally, if you're looking to sell, we would recommend that you seek the assistance of maybe of a licensed real estate agent. And you could go through that process where there will be a purchase agreement. You'll most likely have an escrow company involved, which is a third neutral party that's going to hold the money. And also you could have the benefit of possibly a title company where they could do searches when it comes to encumbrances and liens on the property. So just keep that in mind when you're approaching this type of situation. Next slide, Kevin. Okay. So when it comes to taxes, these are the two agencies here. Primarily, you want to deal with a treasurer and tax collector first. And they do have some options here available. So I'll bring Michael back in to discuss these options here. But just keep in mind, this is again a presentation about property taxes. But then after this slide, we'll discuss other reliefs that are available to property owners. So go ahead, Michael.
Okay, thank you. You have 3 bullets there for some options for help at the treasurer tax collector repayment plans. What we have is, there's more than one, but primarily for consumers, we see the installment plan of redemption, which we call the 5-pay plan because it's 5 payments. So there's some conditions with that, but what it is you can pay some delinquent taxes in installments. You do have to pay your current taxes and stay current, but you get to do 5 payments, 20% annually. One initially, there's an application fee, I think of $75, and you have to pay 20%, and then you have to do that again in increments of 20%, and then have that amount paid off with the last installment. The next bullet is cancellation of penalties, COVID-19, specifically COVID-19, but also other than COVID-19, constituents do request penalty cancellations. And there's an application, you have to justify it. The treasurer and tax collector is limited. There's pretty limited, strict conditions that have to be met. Now, what is probably forefront on all of our minds is COVID-19 penalty cancellations. So just to put it in context, we have 40,000 penalty cancellation requests. 40,000, those were the initial ones. There's still requests coming in. Okay, so we do have on, you will get the links, you'll see those later to contact us, and there are some frequently asked questions for those. But I will say this, the treasurer and tax collector is openly considering the justifications for COVID-19. So it's pretty straightforward. I will say there's delays. It's the advertisement would be 45 to 60 days in normal circumstances for a penalty cancellation request. We are not in those normal circumstances, and we've never had this many before. So there's a delay. I can't even give you an estimate. We have a lot of staff working through those. So they're going to keep coming in, and I will say that it's straightforward. I don't know that of instances where they're overwhelmingly being approved. And I'm going to address a question I think may come up later about these penalty cancellations. So if you put the penalty cancellation, the request for that cancellation in, right, once we have it, you're not going to accrue additional penalties. How that's being processed. And one question may be, well, when do I have to, because some folks that are requesting the penalty cancellations have also not paid those taxes. Generally, you have to pay your tax amount and request your penalty to be canceled. But now circumstances are a little different. So folks have not all paid their taxes. They're delinquent, and some of them are not paid. So a question may be, when do I have to then pay the tax? Well, the processing is going on. Once that gets processed and you get the notification that it's approved, you'll then be notified of the date that you do have to pay those taxes. Okay, that does, that is what it is. That's the circumstance we're in right now. And another question that may come, I don't think it's directly related to property tax, but headlines, deferred taxes. You see headlines in executive orders about deferred payroll taxes. So there may be some questions or thoughts about deferring or canceling property tax. Well, the treasurer and tax collector doesn't have that authority to just decide when to cancel those. That authority is not there. But I will say it this way, is if you're thinking, can I get a deferral on paying my property tax? So what I've just told you is a situation where property owners essentially have a deferral. If you were not able to make the payment, you have penalties due to circumstances caused by this COVID-19 event. You're requesting penalty cancellation. Maybe you hadn't paid that base amount, right? Nothing is that's not accruing while we're processing. And however long it takes to process it, when we do process it, then we will then notify you when those taxes would be due. So it is essentially a deferred situation. And I don't want to say that that's in a way that's an official deferment of your taxes. I'm telling you, it is essentially as if the consequences you have somewhat of a deferment. Okay. I hope I didn't say that in a way that made it worse. I think it's a positive situation. There may be more questions on these penalty cancellations. I'm not going to try to cover all the frequently asked questions right now. The third thing is property tax postponement program. We do have that. It's an application. There's conditions for that. It's generally 62 years age of and older, 62 years and older, own and occupy the residence. Okay, and then there's a household income threshold, plus you have to have a certain amount of equity. So you apply for that. And then there's property tax postponement. They don't go away, they get postponed. And then there's triggers that would happen where it would have to be paid. So they don't go away, they get postponed, those taxes. You do have to stay current on your taxes, meaning your taxes have had to be current. The postponement program postpones payments. And then if you sell the house, or I think if you take a second mortgage, there's other conditions that have to be met. So if you think you fit those criteria, 62, owner occupied with some equity, you can look into the property tax postponement plan. And over to Clemente. Unmute your mic.
I apologize for that. So again, if you're in a situation where the lender advanced funds to cover the taxes, and now they're charging you for that, but you're unable to meet the new payment, you could reach out to the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs Foreclosure Prevention Unit, and we could try to reach out to the lender to see if there's a way that we could come up with an affordable payment plan. Also, if you encounter a situation where it was one of these scams that we talked about, or some other form of scam that we didn't cover today, you could also file a complaint with our department, and we'll try to resolve that issue with you, with hopefully for you. So the complaint process is also there, and we could do both type of assistance simultaneously. So we could do that. So can you invite the next slide, Kevin? Okay, so now I'm going to cover here relief for property owners. And so this is kind of more covering the mortgage side of it. I know the presentation again was about property taxes, but I guess the mortgage side of it also plays hand in hand with taxes. And the first one here is probably what everybody's heard of, right? The CARES Act that was passed signed by President Trump, and this was late March. And when it comes to mortgages, basically what it did was provide a 60-day foreclosure moratorium, and these are for loans that are federally backed, so by one of the government-sponsored enterprises. And you can see on the next slide there, it's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. It also applied to the Federal Housing Administration, the Veteran Affairs, USDA, and I believe HUD. So any of those loans that were backed by one of those agencies, then they were afforded this type of relief. Also, forbearances. So people with a federally backed mortgage could ask for a forbearance. Initially, the forbearance would be provided up to 180 days. And after that, you could request an extension for another 180 days. And now the CARES Act expired at the end of June, but the government-sponsored enterprises, so again, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, decided to keep extending their foreclosure and eviction moratorium. So there was about 2 or 3 extensions, and as it stands, it's the moratorium is good until the end of the year, so December 31st, 2020. Also, during one of those extensions, they came up with an option. So here it's called the payment deferred repayment option. And basically what this means is all those mortgage payments that were deferred can now be placed at the end of the loan. So again, this was very specific to loans that are owned by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So if you're a property owner that's in this situation and you have a Fannie or Freddie Mac loan, and you experience a COVID-related hardship, you may be able to qualify for that. Now going on the state level, Governor Newsom reached an agreement with financial institutions, and primarily it was the announcements was done in conjunction with Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Chase, and one other. I think it was one other one, and then also the 200 and about 200 other state charter banks, credit unions, and mortgage servicers. And the agreement that they reached was that they would provide a 60-day foreclosure and eviction moratorium, and they would also do or offer 90-day forbearance plans for property owners that had a non-federally backed loan, basically. So this kind of bridged that gap from the CARES Act to the ones that didn't have federally backed mortgages, at least in the state of California. Next slide, Kevin. So recently, August 31st, the legislature passed and the governor signed AB 3088, which established the Small Landlord and Homeowner Relief Act. And basically what this did was it provides the same kind of protections and relief that was afforded to federally backed loans to non-federally backed loans. So now it's basically a law. Before, what Governor Newsom did was an agreement with them, but now they passed this bill where it makes it into law. So now it applies to both federally and non-federally backed loans. So non-federally backed loans can seek the same type of forbearance plans that was being provided through the GSEs. If the request is denied, then the lender is supposed to provide a denial in writing, but also must provide the opportunity to cure the defect, right? So it could be anything where it's denied because you didn't sign the paperwork. Then they should provide you the opportunity to cure that defect and resubmit your request. Once the forbearance period ends, the servicer is also supposed to review you for post-forbearance options. So these are options like reinstatement or repayment plans, loan modification. So these are all home retention options that they're supposed to provide. And if for some reason you feel that the servicer is in violation of the act, then you have the right to sue them in court. So fairly new. We think it's a good step in the right direction in providing relief to property owners that we didn't have before. And then the next one here that we're going to talk about lightly is the Board of Supervisors enacted the foreclosure prevention and mortgage assistance motion. What this motion did is basically reallocate $5.5 million of Affordable Housing Trust Fund to provide foreclosure assistance and foreclosure avoidance help. So the program is still very new. It hasn't been developed. As you can see there from the date, it was passed on September 15, so it's still in development. And we suggest that you check back with our department and our website to see any new updates about this new motion passed by the Board of Supervisors. Next slide, Kevin. Okay. So here's additional resources, and I'll let Michael talk about the property tax portal.
Okay, thank you. What you're looking at is a snapshot of the Los Angeles County Property Tax Portal and the departments that I talked about that help account for and collect, bill and collect, and assess the system, the property tax system. This is the portal for all three departments plus the Assessment Appeals Board. So if you look on there, it's hard to see on the slide right now, but just trust me, there's the assessors, the hyperlink to the assessors site, the auditor's site, and the treasurer and tax collector, and there's good info on all of those. This property tax portal is a conglomeration of tons of information, and as you go through, you'll see some of the same language that I put in the first few slides, but there's much more detail and technical detail in there. So this is a one-stop shop. And from there, you can also go to each individual department's site, and the Assessment Appeals Board site really just opens up into right into how to apply and get you started on an application. So it really gets right to the technical aspect of getting an appeal in. And so this is the message disclaimer right on the front. Due to the COVID, you can see the public health link at the bottom. And that's enough about this, because you can go there anytime you want.
Thank you, Michael. Next slide, Kevin. Okay, so here's information on how to contact both agencies. Just a word of caution, the Hall of Administration, which is the main building in downtown, is still closed to the public. However, you can reach us through the telephone numbers here or website, and also you can reach us through email. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. There were several questions submitted through the chat and Q&A, so I'll go ahead and get started with some of those. So the first question, and this is probably for you, Michael. When does a tax collector have the authority to sell tax defaulted property?
Okay, we talked about that, the foreclosures and the power to sell. Here we call it subject, the tax collector's power to sell. So specifically, the question is, when does the tax collector? So by operation of law, the California Revenue and Taxation Code, for tax defaulted properties, it's basically 5 years after default, 5 years of tax default. What that means is residential properties, residential properties zoned for residential, properties with residences, improvements that are, for residential properties, 5 years, plus some agricultural commodity properties. There's another instance that this tax collector would have the power to sell a property, tax defaulted property, in 3 years if it's non-residential commercial, and that includes vacant land within that category. So 5 years, basically, if you're a homeowner on this webinar and you're, thinking about your property that you live in, 5 years. A matter of trivia is that most of those don't go to auction. There's a lot of options out there before that ever happens, and we do a lot to try to keep that from happening. The homeowners have a lot of options. So a lot of times what you see on the tax defaulted property auctions are a lot of vacant land. There's all categories, but a lot of vacant land.
Okay. So there's a follow-up question to that, and the question is the Treasurer and Tax Collector selling any property this year while we're dealing with COVID-19?
That's a great question, because yes and no. Meaning, we normally have a big in-person public auction in October at Pomona Fairplex. So that's our big one. So in October, we're not having it this year. because just with the circumstances, we canceled it. We're going to have an online auction in February. We normally have an online follow-up auction, but now we are going full online platform for a lot of reasons. There's cost, right? County budget, right? There's cost. We want to do be good stewards of the money, the county's money, citizens' money, but also for the safety measures, because we could have thousands of properties for sale. We get 400 to 500 registered bidders and have 1,000 people in one open room. So there's several reasons why, but one big one is to reduce the large gathering, but also we're moving for cost cutting and safety. We're moving everything to the online platform starting in February of 2021.
Okay. Next question. Should I pay my taxes first if I want to file a penalty cancellation request due to COVID-19?
Well, here's an answer. It's always best to pay what taxes you can. The treasurer and tax collector takes partial payments because one, that goes to fund services, but also it would reduce the amount of penalties, right? So what it is what I've described, how the public service division who does current taxes, you remember I'm over in tax defaulted section, how they described what's essentially happening is some folks did not pay and they will get that payment due date once they receive the determination for their penalty cancellation. So what I would say is, yes, pay your taxes if you can. But in this circumstance, for the COVID-19, it is always best to pay your tax, what you can with your taxes. I told you how this is working now because of the present conditions, but tax services staff, we tell people always pay the taxes you can because it does ultimately benefit you. In this case, do you have to pay your taxes before you can file the penalty cancellation? No, I earlier described that you don't have to pay them first before you file that. It is still better for you to do that if you can. If you can't pay the full amount, pay partially because it will ultimately benefit you.
Okay, and so it's kind of along the same lines. We have someone that submitted a cancellation request on the 19th of April, but they're still generating late fees, even with installment payments. Will the penalties be reversed?
I will tell you the official written response to that is, do not be alarmed, right? If you see that. That's easier said than done, right? These situations are happening. So yes, those should be adjusted because the processing of that request may not be done. If that's not a great answer, but the answer is you should try not to be alarmed. That is happening. If you see that, and if you have concerns, you should call the treasurer tax collector with the caveat that we're overwhelmed right now with these, so there may be delays, but by all means, communicate. You can go to the property tax portal or the treasurer and tax collector website. You can send emails. You can send on our contact information. We have room numbers, but the Hall of Administration is not open to the public. But I specifically put the PO box for correspondence. Hey, you can mail us a letter for correspondence with your concerns. You can email us and you can call. Try to be patient.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, how long can you postpone taxes under the postponement program?
Okay, I have the pamphlet right here. I don't have that part memorized.
And
And I'm not gonna
maybe we could
waste people's
explain.
time.
Sorry,
Go on.
sorry, Michael. Maybe we could explain that the postponement program is something offered through the state of California and not necessarily a county program. Um, so maybe you want to just explain how the program is structured, so the audience could understand that it's a state-run program and not necessarily a county program.
Well, what I will say is what you just said, I will not dispute. We have a whole pamphlet and it is spelled out. I'm not able off the top of my head to go into depth, and I won't do that because I don't want to say something that's not correct. Also, right now, I have the pamphlet on our website, Treasurer Tax Collector. Whether you go to the portal, you can go direct to our site. You can look under public service, and it has our programs, and it would have property tax postponement. Because I don't want to say anything wrong, and I'm not going to go through the whole pamphlet while people are here virtually.
Right. So
Okay.
we could probably give you a general overview of this. Again, it's an application. And again, Michael explained earlier that this is geared towards seniors, so 62 and older. And the factors that they consider is the amount of equity on your property. Again, you cannot be delinquent with any prior taxes. And also there are some restrictions. But basically what you're asking is you're applying for the state to provide funds to cover the taxes for that given year. If you are approved for that, then the state will forward that money to the county to cover the taxes, but then the state will record a lien for that amount. And it would accrue interest. I can't tell you the interest right now off the top of my head, but it does accrue interest. But there is no payment due until one of these factors or criteria happen. So if you sell the property.
Yeah, I have some specifics. I did find it.
Yes. So if you sell the property, if of course death is one of the events, and they're going to require either your estate to repay it. Is refinance one of those, Michael?
It is. If you move from the property, sell it or convey title, death, or allow future property taxes to become delinquent, or you refinance or obtain a reverse mortgage, those are the collection and repayment triggers. No repayment is required until one of those events takes place. So you can.
And then to kind of answer the question is you would have to apply for this every year, right? But again, the factors they consider
yes, it's for a year. It's not file once and then not pay forever.
So you would have to do it on a yearly basis, and again, depending on the amount of equity that you have on the property, would be one of those factors they consider to either again approve or deny the application.
And it is 7% per year interest on the postponed property taxes, computed each month on a simple interest basis.
Okay.
So it's not cheap, but it serves a purpose.
Sure. Okay, so we do have another question. If I mail in a payment, will I get a receipt? Good question.
No, I don't think so. But I don't see the payments when we have in person. No, not to my knowledge, because when we were open in the lobby to take in-person payments, folks specifically come in because they don't want to mail their payment because some folks need to have the receipt. Right now, I don't think you get if you mail it in, I don't think you will get a receipt sent to you.
Okay. And then also understand if you're paying with check or cashier's check, money order, those are typically certified funds. So you do have at least some form of proving that you submitted a payment. So you could always go back to your bank and ask for a copy of the canceled check.
Correct.
If you do online banking, that image in most cases will be available through your online banking application. Money orders and stuff like that, it works the same way. You could go back and ask for a copy of the endorsed check or money order, whatever the case is. But I think the question was specific to will the county mail you a receipt for the payment, and then it's probably going to be no.
No.
Okay. Let me see. There's a couple more questions here. Okay, so I think there's questions about the status of the cancellation request. Mike, can you share maybe, is this the correct number where the audience could call to get a status of their cancellation request?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's the 213 number that you see on your screen right now. Do you have a general email that you could share with the audience where they could email about the status of their request?
Hold on.
Okay, and while Michael's looking, I'll go through the next set of questions. So again, if you're just requesting or inquiring about the status, again, you could call that 213 number that's on the screen. You should probably be able to find additional information on the TTC's website. So just visit that website and hopefully you could get more information there.
Yes, that's what I'm going to say right now. I don't have that email right in front of me for the Public Service Division, but our website has on most pages has a contact link, contact us link, which would have the various ways to do it. So I'll update these slides for the next time and put the email on there.
Okay. Here's another question, and maybe I could frame this where it's a little more general. If someone's making payments, and I'm going to assume on delinquent taxes, will there be a new bill generated, or is there something like a substitute bill that would show the balances and the payments that have been made?
Say that again.
Okay. So we have a question here, and I was trying to frame it where it's a little more general, but the person stating that the payments are generating updated bills, but with the balance due and new late fees.
Okay. Because that's the normal. That would be normal, and circumstances are not normal right now. So what is the question specifically?
Not sure, and that's why I was trying to reframe it, but I do recall seeing where, someone comes in with that pink bill.
Yeah.
And it shows there's a line entry for tax year. It tells you what tax year is delinquent or defaulted. And if you're making payments to that, you should be able to see, at least on the section where it calculates all the subtotals, there should be a section there that gives you credit for payments. And so as far as the other amounts, I'm not sure if those are being updated as well. But on those, when you're making payments and you're issued a new document, I think it does update the figures there. Let's see. Okay, I think we may have time for one more question. Okay. So the last question here is, where can one find a list of properties that would be auctioned online? And when will the list be available?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Where can one find the list of properties that will be auctioned online? And when will that list be available?
Well, you can go to our website and we have a tab for auctions. And we just updated the auction schedule, the new auction schedule, starting in February. And there will be a location on that, our website, the Treasurer Tax Collector website, in the auctions tab, there'll be a page, and around January of 2021 the list will be available there for the February auction.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Michael, for your thorough presentation. We understand that this is a very difficult and stressful time for most people. If you or someone you know is experiencing a financial hardship, please remember that DCBA is here to help. Our services are free and confidential, and our well-trained staff can help you and your lender to explore all options to saving the home. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.